Standing in that sterile courthouse hallway, I watched my sister Evangeline smirk as she clutched the deed to my childhood home. "Finally, your house is mine," she declared loud enough for everyone to hear. 28 years of sibling rivalry had led to this moment, but I had no idea how deep her betrayal ran. The family secrets she had weaponized against me were about to unravel in ways none of us could have imagined. This was just the beginning of a war I never saw coming. Hey everyone. Before we dive into this incredible family revenge story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready for a wild ride filled with shocking betrayals and ultimate justice smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this story will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single twist in this family drama that proves blood isn't always thicker than water. My name is Serafina, and until 3 months ago, I believed my family was built on love and trust. I was so incredibly wrong. It started when Dad called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice shaking in a way I had never heard before. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk. Can you come over right now?" The urgency in his tone made my stomach drop. I grabbed my keys and drove the 15 minutes to the house where I had grown up, the beautiful Victorian home on Maple Street that had been in our family for 3 generations. When I arrived, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table with tissues scattered around her, her eyes red and swollen. Dad paced back and forth, running his hands through his graying hair. The scene immediately reminded me of when they told me about Grandma's cancer diagnosis 5 years earlier. "What's going on?" I asked, settling into the chair across from Mom. Dad stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Your sister has been stealing from us, Sarah, for years." The words hit me like a physical blow. Evangeline, my older sister by 3 years, had always been the golden child. She was the one who graduated summa cum laude from law school, who married the successful investment banker who lived in the sprawling suburban mansion. She was the one who never seemed to struggle with anything. "That's impossible," I said immediately. "Evangeline doesn't need money. She and Marcus are doing incredibly well." Mom finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's what we thought too, sweetheart. But we discovered something terrible." Dad pulled out a thick folder from the kitchen counter and set it in front of me. 3 weeks ago, I was organizing our financial documents for tax season when I noticed some discrepancies in our accounts. Money missing here and there, nothing too obvious at first. So I decided to dig deeper. As he opened the folder, my heart began racing. Inside were bank statements, copies of checks, and what appeared to be legal documents. Dad pointed to a series of transactions highlighted in yellow. "Look at these withdrawals," he said. 15,000 here, 23,000 there, 8,000 from the savings account, all authorized by someone with power of attorney access. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. "But who has power of attorney besides you two?" "That's just it," Mom said, wiping her eyes again. "We gave it to Evangeline 2 years ago when your father had that heart episode. We thought it would be smart to have someone we trusted handle our affairs if something happened to us." The pieces began falling into place, and the picture they formed made me feel sick. "How much money are we talking about?" Dad's jaw tightened. "Over $240,000, Sarah. She's been systematically draining our retirement accounts, our emergency funds, even the money we set aside for home repairs." I felt the room spinning around me. $240,000 was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It represented decades of my parents' careful saving their entire financial security. "Have you confronted her?" I asked. "We tried," Mom said. "Last week we called her and asked her to come over. When we showed her the evidence, she didn't even deny it. She just sat there with this cold expression and said it was her right as the eldest daughter. Her right, I practically shouted. How is stealing your life savings her right? Dad sat down heavily in his chair. She said we owed her for all the years she spent being the responsible one for taking care of family obligations while you were off finding yourself in college and your early career. The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth to it. After college, I had spent 2 years traveling and working odd jobs before settling into my career as a graphic designer. During that time, Evangeline had indeed handled many family responsibilities. She had been the one to coordinate family gatherings, to check on our aging grandparents, to handle the legal aspects of Grandma's estate when she passed. But none of that justified theft. What did she say when you asked for the money back? I asked. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that made my blood run cold. She laughed, Mom said quietly. She actually laughed and told us we should be grateful she left us anything at all. Then she said something that really scared us. Dad leaned forward. She said she had been planning this for years and that by the time we figured out how to stop her, she would own everything that mattered to this family. The threat was clear and terrifying. Evangeline was not just stealing money. She was systematically destroying our family's financial foundation. We need to call the police, I said immediately. We did, Dad replied. But here's the problem, Sarah. Technically, she had legal authority to access those accounts. The power of attorney document gives her broad discretionary powers. The police said it's a civil matter, not a criminal one. I stared at my parents, seeing the defeat in their eyes. They had worked their entire lives to build financial security, and their own daughter had destroyed it all. The betrayal was devastating enough, but the realization that there might be no legal recourse made it even worse. There has to be something we can do, I said. What about a lawyer? We consulted with Attorney Johnson downtown, Mom said. He reviewed all our documents and said we could potentially file a civil suit, but it would be expensive and difficult to prove that Evangeline exceeded her authority or acted against our interests. Dad nodded grimly. Especially since she's a lawyer herself. She knows exactly how to structure these things to protect herself. As I sat there processing this information, a terrible thought occurred to me. Dad, what about the house? Please tell me the house is safe. The silence that followed my question was answer enough. She's been researching property transfer laws, Mom said finally. Last month she came by with some papers she wanted us to sign, claiming they were routine updates to our estate planning. We didn't sign them, thank God, but Attorney Johnson thinks she's trying to find a way to transfer ownership of the house to herself. I felt rage building in my chest like nothing I had ever experienced before. The house on Maple Street was not just property, it was our family's heart. It was where my grandparents had raised my father, where I had learned to ride my bike in the driveway, where every holiday and birthday had been celebrated for decades. The idea that Evangeline would try to steal it felt like the ultimate betrayal. But as I looked at my parents' devastated faces, I realized this was about more than money or property. This was about power control and a twisted sense of entitlement that had apparently been festering in my sister for years. I had no idea that this was just the beginning of a battle that would tear our family apart and reveal secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most. The confrontation happened exactly 1 week later, and it was nothing like I had imagined it would be. I had spent those 7 days researching everything I could about financial elder abuse power of attorney laws and civil litigation procedures. I called every lawyer in our county, spoke with financial advisors, and even contacted the district attorney's office to understand our options. What I discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. While Evangeline had been technically within her legal rights to access the accounts, there were several aspects of her behavior that could potentially be challenged in court. The key was proving that she had acted against our parents' best interests and exceeded the scope of reasonable financial management. But I needed evidence, and I needed Evangeline to reveal more about her true intentions. So, I set a trap. I called her on Thursday morning, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Hey, Evie, I was wondering if you could meet me for coffee this weekend. I want to talk to you about Mom and Dad's situation." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What situation?" "You know their financial concerns. Dad mentioned they're worried about retirement planning, and I thought maybe we could work together to help them figure out their options." Another pause longer this time. "Of course. How about Saturday morning at that new cafe downtown, 10 o'clock? "Perfect. See you then." What Evangeline didn't know was that I had no intention of going into this conversation blind. I had arranged for my friend Jake, who worked in digital forensics, to help me set up a recording app on my phone. I had also consulted with attorney Rodriguez, a sharp young lawyer who specialized in financial crimes, about exactly what questions to ask and what admissions to try to elicit. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I arrived at the cafe early and chose a corner table where our conversation would be private, but where the acoustics would be good for recording. Evangeline walked in exactly on time, looking immaculate as always in her tailored wool coat and designer handbag. She had always been beautiful, but there was something different about her expression that morning, a hardness around her eyes that I had never noticed before. "Sarah," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "You look tired. Everything okay?" The casual concern in her voice made my stomach turn, knowing what I now knew about her recent activities. "Just worried about Mom and Dad," I said, sipping my coffee. "They seem really stressed about money lately." Evangeline's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. "Well, they're getting older. It's natural for seniors to worry about financial security." "Is it?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational. "I mean, I always thought they were pretty well set for retirement. Dad worked for the city for 35 years. Mom taught school for 28 years. They should have decent pensions and savings, right?" Something flickered across Evangeline's face. "Things are more complicated than you realize, Sarah. You've never really paid attention to family finances." "That's true," I admitted. "I guess I always assumed you and Mom and Dad had everything handled. You're the lawyer in the family, after all." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Exactly, which is why they asked me to help them with their financial management." This was my opening. "How exactly are you helping them?" "Oh, just making sure their money is invested properly, handling some of their bigger expenses, that sort of thing." Her voice was casual, but I noticed she wasn't making eye contact. "That's so generous of you," I said. "It must be a lot of work managing their accounts on top of your own practice." "It's not that much work," she said quickly. "And honestly, Sarah, they needed the help. Some of their financial decisions over the years have been questionable." I felt my anger spike, but forced myself to stay calm. "What do you mean?" Evangeline leaned back in her chair, and suddenly her whole demeanor changed. The pretense of sisterly concern evaporated, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I mean, they've been irresponsible with money for years. Do you have any idea how much they spent on your college education? Your little finding yourself phase after graduation? All those times they bailed you out when you couldn't make rent in your early 20s. The accusations hit like slaps. They never complained about helping me, and I paid them back everything I borrowed. "Did you, though?" Evangeline's voice was getting sharper. "Did you pay them back the opportunity cost of that money? The interest it could have earned, the financial stress they experienced because they were constantly worrying about your stability." I stared at her, seeing a side of my sister I had never glimpsed before. This was not the successful, composed woman I thought I knew. This was someone who had been keeping score, harboring resentments, and apparently planning some kind of revenge for years. Evie, what are you saying exactly? She laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. I'm saying that for 31 years, I have been the responsible daughter. I was the one who got straight A's, who went to law school, who married well, who took care of family obligations. And what did I get for it? The privilege of watching Mom and Dad throw money at their precious baby daughter whenever she needed rescuing. The venom in her voice was shocking. So you decided to, steal their retirement savings as compensation? Steal? Evangeline's eyebrows shot up. That's a very strong word, Sarah. I prefer to think of it as claiming what was rightfully mine. Do you know how much money I saved them over the years by handling Grandma's estate, by managing Grandpa's affairs when he got dementia, by being the one they could always count on? That's what family does, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. We help each other. That doesn't mean you get to raid their bank accounts. Doesn't it? She leaned forward, her eyes glittering with something that looked almost like excitement. They gave me power of attorney, Sarah. That means they trusted me to make financial decisions on their behalf. And I decided that after decades of subsidizing your lifestyle, it was time for them to invest in their other daughter's future. I felt sick listening to her twist the situation to justify her actions. Their future, Evie, you took their entire retirement fund. I redistributed family resources more equitably, she corrected. And frankly, they should be grateful. Do you think they'll be able to take care of themselves as they get older? Who do you think will be paying for their medical care, their assisted living, their end-of-life expenses? It won't be you, will it, Sarah? You can barely manage your own finances. The cruelty of her words took my breath away. She was not only stealing from our parents, she was planning to use that theft to gain control over their entire lives. What about the house? I asked quietly. Evangeline's smile was triumphant. What about it? Are you planning to take that too? The house is the family's most valuable asset, she said matter-of-factly. It makes perfect sense for it to belong to the family member who is most capable of maintaining it and preserving its value. You mean you? I mean me. I stared at my sister across the cafe table, realizing that I was looking at a stranger. The woman sitting across from me had systematically planned to destroy our parents' financial security and was proud of it. She felt entitled to steal from them because she believed their love for me had somehow damaged her. But what terrified me most was the calculating way she had explained her actions. This was not the impulsive decision of someone in financial trouble. This was a carefully orchestrated plan executed by someone who felt completely justified in her actions. As I walked to my car after the meeting, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. But I had what I needed. Evangeline's admissions were clearly recorded, and her casual confession of financial manipulation would give Attorney Rodriguez exactly the ammunition we needed to fight back. What I didn't realize was that exposing Evangeline's crimes was going to be much more complicated than I had imagined, and the battle for our family's future was just beginning. The recording changed everything, but not in the way I had hoped. Attorney Rodriguez listened to the entire 43-minute conversation twice, taking notes and occasionally asking me to replay specific sections. When it was over, she leaned back in her chair and smiled for the first time since I had walked into her office. This is good, Serafina. Really good. Your sister essentially confessed to financial abuse and revealed her intent to continue manipulating your parents' assets for her own benefit. So we can stop her, I asked. We can definitely try, but I need to be honest with you about what we're facing. Your sister is a practicing attorney with significant resources and connections in the legal community. She's not going to go down without a fight, and she's going to use every advantage she has." Rodriguez was right to be cautious. Within 24 hours of filing our initial motion to freeze the remaining assets and revoke Evangeline's power of attorney, she had hired Camden Pearson Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. The countersuit arrived 3 days later, and it was devastating. Evangeline was not only denying all wrongdoing, she was claiming that I had manipulated our elderly parents into believing false accusations against her. According to her legal team, I was the one attempting to financially abuse Mom and Dad by turning them against their elder daughter and trying to gain control of their assets for myself. Even worse, she had somehow obtained records of every time our parents had helped me financially over the years. The document detailed 26 instances dating back to my college years, including tuition payments, rent assistance, car repairs, and even grocery money during particularly lean months. The total came to nearly $68,000. "This is brilliant," Rodriguez said grimly as we reviewed the countersuit together. "Evil but brilliant. She's reframing the entire narrative. Instead of being the daughter who stole from her parents, she's now the responsible daughter who had to watch her parents enable their other daughter's financial irresponsibility for years." I felt nauseated reading through the detailed accounting of my parents' generosity. Every instance of help looked different when presented as evidence of favoritism and financial drain. "But the recording," I protested. "She admitted to taking the money. She said she was entitled to it." And her lawyers will argue that she was simply explaining how she had been forced to manage family resources more equitably after years of watching your parents make poor financial decisions, Rodriguez replied. "They'll paint her as the dutiful daughter who finally had to step in to protect her parents from themselves." The legal battle escalated quickly from there. Evangeline's team filed motions to dismiss our case, motions to sanction our attorney for filing frivolous claims, and motions to have the court investigate me for attempting to manipulate elderly people. But the most devastating blow came when they petitioned the court to grant Evangeline permanent guardianship over our parents, claiming that Mom and Dad were no longer competent to make their own financial decisions. "She's going nuclear," Rodriguez said when she called to tell me about the latest filing. "If she gets guardianship, she'll have complete control over your parents' lives. Where they live, how they spend their money, what medical care they receive, everything." I realized we needed help, and we needed it fast. The first ally I recruited was entirely unexpected. Dr. Patricia Molina was the geriatrician who had been treating my father since his heart episode 2 years earlier. When I explained the situation to her, she was outraged. "Your father is completely competent," she said firmly. "I've been monitoring his cognitive function regularly since his cardiac event, and there's absolutely no evidence of diminished capacity. Your mother is even sharper than most people half her age." Dr. Molina agreed to testify on our behalf and provide detailed medical documentation of our parents' mental competency. But she also gave me something even more valuable information about other families who had faced similar situations. Financial abuse of elderly parents by their own children is unfortunately common, she told me. But there's a support group that meets here at the medical center every Tuesday evening. You should come. You'll be amazed by what you learn. That Tuesday evening changed my entire understanding of what we were dealing with. The support group consisted of 8 families, all of whom were battling financial abuse situations involving adult children who had exploited their parents' trust. The stories were heartbreakingly similar. Successful, seemingly responsible children who had gradually gained control over their parents' finances and then systematically drained them. But what struck me most was how these families had learned to fight back. Margaret Williams, a retired teacher whose son had stolen nearly $400,000 from her and her late husband, had successfully recovered most of the money by building a coalition of evidence that included bank records, witness testimonies, and expert analysis of spending patterns. "The key is documentation," Margaret told me. "These adult children think they're so smart, but they always leave a trail. You just have to know how to find it." She introduced me to her forensic accountant, David Chin, who specialized in tracing funds in financial abuse cases. David agreed to analyze the transactions from my parents' accounts, and what he found was even more damaging to Evangeline than I had hoped. "Your sister didn't just take money randomly," David explained as he showed me his analysis. "Look at these patterns. She timed withdrawals to coincide with your parents' major expenses. When they needed a new roof, she took $20,000 the day before they were supposed to pay the contractor. When your father needed medical tests, she withdrew $8,000 from their health savings account." The pattern revealed something chilling. Evangeline had not just been stealing money. She had been deliberately sabotaging our parents' ability to maintain their independence and quality of life. She was creating financial crises, I realized. "Exactly," David confirmed. "And then positioning herself as the solution. Classic financial abuse pattern." Armed with David's analysis and Dr. Molina's medical documentation, we began building a comprehensive case. But Evangeline was building her own coalition, and her resources were formidable. She had convinced 3 family friends to provide affidavits supporting her version of events. According to these statements, I had always been irresponsible with money and had repeatedly taken advantage of our parents' generosity. The affidavits painted Evangeline as a concerned daughter who had been forced to intervene to protect our aging parents. Even more troubling, she had somehow obtained psychological evaluations suggesting that our parents were suffering from early-stage cognitive decline that made them vulnerable to manipulation. "How is this possible?" I asked Rodriguez. "Dr. Molina just examined Dad last month. His cognitive function is completely normal." "Different doctors can reach different conclusions," Rodriguez said carefully, "especially if they're predisposed to see what someone wants them to see." The implication was clear. Evangeline had found doctors willing to provide the evaluations she needed regardless of the actual facts. But our coalition was growing stronger too. The support group had connected me with investigative journalist Sarah Kim, who had been researching financial elder abuse for a series of articles. Sarah was fascinated by our case because of the legal complexity and the fact that the abuser was herself an attorney. "This could be huge," Sarah told me during our first interview. "If we can prove that a practicing lawyer systematically abused her power of attorney to steal from her own parents, it could change how these cases are prosecuted." Sarah's investigation uncovered connections we had never suspected. Evangeline had been borrowing money against her own home and business for months before the thefts began, suggesting that she had been in serious financial trouble despite her appearances of success. Even more damaging, Sarah discovered that Evangeline had been researching elder financial abuse laws for over a year before she began taking money from our parents' accounts. The searches in her browser history showed that she had been studying exactly how to exploit power of attorney privileges without triggering criminal charges. As the evidence mounted, I began to feel hopeful that we might actually win this fight. But I had no idea that the person I trusted most in our coalition was about to betray us in the most devastating way possible, putting everything we had worked for in jeopardy and nearly destroying our case entirely. The battle was far from over, and the worst betrayal was yet to come. The betrayal came from the person I least expected, and at the worst possible moment. We were just 2 days away from the crucial hearing where the judge would decide whether to grant Evangeline guardianship over our parents. Our legal team had spent weeks preparing what we believed was an airtight case. We had David Chin's forensic analysis, Dr. Molina's medical testimony, Sarah Kim's investigative findings, and dozens of documents proving Evangeline's calculated theft. I felt confident as I walked into Attorney Rodriguez's office that Thursday morning for our final strategy session. That confidence evaporated the moment I saw her expression. "We have a problem, Serafina. A big one." Rodriguez slid a manila envelope across her desk. Inside were photocopies of what appeared to be financial documents, but as I examined them more closely, my blood ran cold. "What am I looking at?" I asked, though part of me already knew. David Chin provided these documents to Evangeline's legal team yesterday afternoon. "Bank records showing that you received a $50,000 payment from your parents 18 months ago that you never reported to us." The room felt like it was spinning. "That's impossible. I never received $50,000 from my parents, ever." Rodriguez's expression was grim. "The documentation looks legitimate, Sarah. Account numbers match, signatures appear authentic, and the timing coincides with when you told me you were struggling financially after losing that freelance contract." I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. The bank routing numbers were correct. The account information matched my parents' savings account, and there at the bottom was what appeared to be my signature on a deposit slip. But I had never seen these documents before in my life. "David Chin gave this to them," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "According to their filing, yes. They're claiming that he discovered this transaction during his forensic analysis, but that we deliberately concealed it because it undermined our case." The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the court believed I had received $50,000 from my parents without disclosing it, our entire case would collapse. Instead of being the concerned daughter trying to protect her parents from financial abuse, I would look like a hypocrite who had benefited from the same system I was now condemning. "We need to talk to David immediately," I said, reaching for my phone. "I've been trying to reach him since yesterday evening," Rodriguez replied. "His office says he's out of town on a family emergency, and his cell phone goes straight to voicemail." A sick feeling settled in my stomach. David Chin, the forensic accountant who had been our star witness, had apparently betrayed us to Evangeline's team and then disappeared just before the most important hearing of our case. But as I continued studying the documents, something felt wrong about them. The signature looked like mine, but there was something slightly off about the formation of certain letters. The date formatting seemed inconsistent with how my parents' bank typically handled transactions. And most importantly, I had absolutely no memory of receiving this money. "Rodriguez, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said. "These documents are forgeries. I have never received $50,000 from my parents. Ever. And I think David Chin has been working for Evangeline all along." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation, Sarah. David came highly recommended from the support group. Margaret Williams vouched for him personally." "Then we need to call Margaret right now." The phone call to Margaret Williams revealed the terrifying scope of the betrayal. Margaret's voice was shaky as she explained what had happened to her case. "David disappeared 3 weeks ago," she said, "right after we discovered that some of our key financial evidence had been compromised. The bank records he had been analyzing suddenly showed discrepancies that made our case look fabricated." I felt my heart sink. "Why didn't you call to warn us?" "I tried," Margaret said, "but when I called your attorney's office, someone told me you were no longer working with David and had found a different forensic accountant. I assumed you had discovered the problems on your own." Rodriguez and I exchanged horrified looks. No one from our office had told Margaret anything. Someone else had been intercepting communications and feeding false information to our allies. "Margaret, I need you to think carefully. How did David first get involved in your case?" There was a long pause. You know, that's strange. I thought he had been recommended by Dr. Molina, but when I mentioned it to her later, she said she had never heard of him. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was devastating. David Chin had not been a legitimate forensic accountant helping families fight financial abuse. He had been working for Evangeline from the beginning, infiltrating our support network and gathering information that she could use against us. He had access to everything, I said to Rodriguez after we hung up with Margaret. Our entire case strategy, all our evidence, our witness lists. He knew exactly what we were planning to argue and exactly how to undermine it. It gets worse, Rodriguez said grimly. If he's been feeding information to Evangeline's team for weeks, they've had time to prepare counter-evidence for every argument we're planning to make. I thought about all the sensitive information I had shared with David over the past month. Details about my parents' medical conditions, their financial history, their relationships with family friends. Personal information about my own financial struggles and career setbacks. Even transcripts of private conversations with my parents about their fears and concerns. Evangeline had been inside our operation from the very beginning, watching our every move and planning her counter-strategy accordingly. But the most devastating realization was yet to come. As Rodriguez and I frantically tried to figure out how to salvage our case, her assistant knocked on the door with an urgent message. Ms. Rodriguez, I just received a call from the court clerk. Evangeline's attorneys have filed an emergency motion requesting that tomorrow's hearing be converted to a criminal investigation. They're alleging that Serafina has been engaged in a conspiracy to defraud elderly people and that she forged documents to support false accusations against her sister. I felt the air leave my lungs. In less than 24 hours, I had gone from being the concerned daughter fighting to protect her parents to being the primary suspect in an alleged criminal conspiracy. Can they do that? I asked. If the judge believes there's evidence of criminal activity, yes, Rodriguez replied. Instead of a civil hearing about guardianship and power of attorney, we could be looking at criminal charges for fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The trap had been perfectly laid. Evangeline had not just been defending herself against our accusations. She had been systematically building a criminal case against me. Every piece of evidence we had gathered, every strategy we had planned, every ally we had recruited had been compromised from the beginning. David Chin's betrayal had given her everything she needed to destroy not just our legal case, but my entire life. As I sat in Rodriguez's office that evening watching the sun set through her windows, I realized that I was completely alone in this fight. My parents believed in me, but they were the alleged victims and couldn't be seen as objective. Rodriguez believed me, but she was just one lawyer against a team of highly paid legal experts. Sarah Kim's journalistic investigation had been compromised because David had fed her false information. Margaret Williams and the support group had been neutralized by similar betrayals in their own cases. Evangeline had won, and she had done it by turning our greatest strength, our network of allies, into the weapon that destroyed us. But what I didn't know was that the darkest hour of our battle was about to reveal an ally I never could have imagined, someone who would provide the evidence we needed to not only save our case, but to expose the full scope of Evangeline's crimes in a way that would shock everyone involved. The call came at 11:30 that Friday night, just hours before what I thought would be the hearing that destroyed my life. I was sitting on my couch surrounded by legal documents and empty coffee cups when an unknown number appeared on my phone. Normally, I would not have answered, but something made me pick up. Is this Serafina? The voice was male, older, with a slight accent I could not immediately place. Yes, who is this? My name is Marcus Blackwell. I believe you know my wife. It took me a moment to process what he had said. Marcus Blackwell was Evangeline's husband, the successful investment banker she had married 5 years earlier. The man who, according to everything I knew, supported her completely and shared in her apparent financial success. Mr. Blackwell, Why are you calling me? Because I have information you need, and after tomorrow's hearing, it may be too late for either of us. His voice was tense, almost frightened. Can you meet me tonight, somewhere public but private? There are things about your sister you need to know. Against every instinct screaming at me that this was another trap, I agreed to meet him at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. As I drove through the empty streets, I tried to imagine what Evangeline's husband could possibly want to tell me. Marcus was already waiting in a corner booth when I arrived, hunched over a cup of coffee and looking nothing like the confident businessman I remembered from family gatherings. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said as I slid into the seat across from him. "I was not sure you would." "I'm not sure I should have," I replied honestly. "How do I know this is not another setup?" Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Because I have been documenting everything for the past 18 months, waiting for the right moment to act. Your legal battle gave me that moment." He opened the envelope and spread dozens of documents across the table. Bank statements, email printouts, photographs of documents, and what appeared to be recorded conversation transcripts. "Your sister has been lying to everyone about our financial situation," Marcus said quietly. "We are not successful. We have not been successful for years. We are drowning in debt, and Evangeline has been using increasingly desperate measures to keep up appearances." I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. According to the bank statements, Evangeline and Marcus's joint accounts showed a pattern of mounting debt-failed investments and desperate transfers between accounts to cover minimum payments. "This shows you owe over $300,000 in credit card debt alone," I said, looking at one particularly devastating statement. "That is just the beginning," Marcus replied grimly. "We owe another $200,000 on a second mortgage Evangeline took out without telling me $75,000 in business loans for her law practice that she used for personal expenses, and nearly $100,000 to various investment schemes that promised quick returns." The numbers were staggering. According to these documents, Evangeline was nearly $750,000 in debt, despite maintaining the appearance of prosperity. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because she has been stealing from your parents to cover our debts, and when that money runs out, she plans to take their house and put them in a state facility so she can sell the property." The casual cruelty of the plan took my breath away. "How do you know?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a recording app. "I have been recording our conversations for months. Listen to this." He played a snippet of audio that was clearly Evangeline's voice. "Once we get guardianship, we can move them to that place in Riverside. It costs $1,800 a month, but the house will sell for at least $400,000. Even after paying off the debts, we will have enough left over to start fresh somewhere else." I felt sick listening to my sister discuss our parents' future as if they were financial assets to be liquidated. "There is more," Marcus continued. "Much more. She has been planning this for over 2 years. She researched elder care facilities, investigated property values, even contacted real estate agents about selling the house before she ever started taking money from your parents' accounts." He showed me printed emails where Evangeline had corresponded with various professionals about the logistics of gaining control over elderly parents' assets. The level of premeditation was shocking. "But the most important thing is this," Marcus said, pulling out another document. "David Chin is not a real forensic accountant. He is a private investigator Evangeline hired to infiltrate your support network and gather information about your case strategy." The document was a contract between Evangeline and a private investigation firm. David Chin's real name was Daniel Chavez, and he was a former police officer who specialized in corporate espionage and litigation support. She paid him $25,000 to pose as a forensic accountant and feed information back to her legal team, Marcus explained. Those documents showing you received $50,000 from your parents. He created them using software that can perfectly replicate bank documents. I stared at the contract, finally understanding the full scope of Evangeline's deception. She had not just been stealing money, she had been running a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to destroy anyone who tried to stop her. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why are you betraying your own wife?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his coffee. "Because she is not the woman I married, and what she is doing to your family is evil. But also because I discovered something else." He pulled out one final document, and when I saw what it was, everything clicked into place. "She has been planning to divorce me once she gets control of your parents' assets," Marcus said quietly. "She has already met with divorce attorneys and discussed how to hide assets during proceedings. The plan was to gain guardianship, liquidate your parents' property, pay off our debts, and then file for divorce while claiming I was responsible for our financial problems." The document was a consultation summary from a divorce attorney outlining strategies for protecting assets and shifting blame for marital debt. It was dated just 3 weeks earlier. "I would have lost everything while she walked away with whatever was left of your parents' money," Marcus continued. "When I confronted her about it yesterday, she did not even deny it. She said I was weak and that she needed a fresh start with someone who could match her ambition." I looked at the broken man sitting across from me and realized that Evangeline had been planning to destroy her own husband just as ruthlessly as she had been destroying our parents. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Help me stop her," Marcus said. "I will testify about everything. I will provide all the evidence I have been collecting. I will expose every lie she has told and every crime she has committed. But I need your attorney to file the right motions and present the evidence properly." I pulled out my phone and called Rodriguez despite the late hour. When I explained what was happening, she was at the diner within 40 minutes. The next 3 hours were a whirlwind of legal preparation as Rodriguez reviewed Marcus's evidence and prepared emergency motions to present to the court. The forged documents, the recorded conversations, the proof of David Chin's real identity, and the evidence of Evangeline's long-term planning created a devastating case against her. But the most powerful piece of evidence was Marcus himself. A husband willing to testify against his own wife, armed with months of documented evidence and recorded confessions, was exactly what we needed to turn the case around. As the sun rose that Saturday morning, I realized that Evangeline's greatest strength, her ability to manipulate the people closest to her, had finally become her greatest weakness. She had pushed her own husband so far that he was willing to destroy her to save himself and our family. The hearing that was supposed to end with my criminal indictment was about to become Evangeline's worst nightmare. The courtroom was packed that Saturday morning, but the hearing that unfolded was nothing like anyone had expected. Judge Patricia Hawthorne had been prepared to hear arguments about guardianship and possible criminal charges against me. Instead, she found herself presiding over the complete collapse of one of the most elaborate financial fraud schemes her court had ever seen. Attorney Rodriguez began by presenting Marcus's evidence, starting with the recorded conversations where Evangeline discussed liquidating our parents' assets and placing them in the cheapest possible care facility. The judge's expression grew darker with each revelation. When Rodriguez played the recording where Evangeline casually discussed forging financial documents to frame me, the courtroom fell completely silent. Your Honor, Rodriguez said, "We have discovered that the defendant has been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise designed to defraud elderly victims while simultaneously destroying anyone who attempted to interfere with her plans." Evangeline's high-powered legal team tried to object, but the evidence was overwhelming. Marcus testified for over an hour, providing detailed accounts of Evangeline's planning her debts, her manipulation of our parents' trust, and her scheme to abandon him once she had liquidated our family's assets. The most devastating moment came when Rodriguez presented proof that David Chin was actually Daniel Chavez, a private investigator hired by Evangeline to infiltrate our support network. When Judge Hawthorne learned that multiple families had been victimized by the same scheme, her anger was visible. "Miss Evangeline Blackwell," the judge said, her voice cutting through the courtroom, "you are an officer of the court who has used your legal knowledge to systematically abuse elderly family members and obstruct justice. This court finds your actions to be among the most reprehensible examples of professional misconduct I have encountered in 23 years on the bench." The judge immediately froze all assets that Evangeline had transferred from our parents' accounts, revoked her power of attorney permanently, and ordered a criminal investigation into her activities. But the consequences went far beyond the courtroom. Within 48 hours, the State Bar Association had opened its own investigation into Evangeline's conduct. Sarah Kim's article about the case was published in the Sunday edition of the state's largest newspaper, exposing not just Evangeline's crimes, but the broader pattern of financial elder abuse that David/Daniel's fake forensic services had enabled. By Tuesday, 3 other families had come forward with evidence that they had been victimized by the same scheme. By Friday, the FBI had opened a federal investigation into interstate fraud and elder abuse. But the most satisfying moment came 2 weeks later when I got the call that most of our parents' money had been recovered. "We found it," Rodriguez told me over the phone. Nearly $200,000 was sitting in accounts Marcus helped us locate. "Your sister was too arrogant to actually spend most of the money. She was just moving it around to hide it while she executed the rest of her plan." The house was never in real danger after all. Once Evangeline's power of attorney was revoked and the criminal charges were filed, any attempt to transfer property ownership became impossible. Mom and Dad were devastated by Evangeline's betrayal, but they were also relieved to have the truth finally exposed. "I kept thinking I was losing my mind," Dad told me a few weeks after the hearing. "The way she would gaslight us about our own financial decisions, making us question our memories and our judgment. It was psychological torture." The healing process was long and difficult. Family therapy helped us process the trauma of having been so thoroughly deceived by someone we loved. But in some ways, the experience brought us closer together than we had ever been. Marcus filed for divorce immediately after the hearing and cooperated fully with all investigations into Evangeline's activities. The divorce was finalized within 6 months, with Marcus receiving nothing except freedom from the massive debts Evangeline had accumulated. "I lost everything financially," he told me when we had coffee 6 months later, "but I got my integrity back. That woman nearly destroyed my soul along with my bank account." Evangeline was ultimately sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to all her victims. Her law license was permanently revoked, and she was required to undergo psychological evaluation and treatment. But perhaps the most important outcome was the changes her case sparked in elder abuse laws. The scheme involving fake forensic accountants led to new regulations requiring verification of professional credentials in financial abuse cases. Sarah Kim's continued reporting helped expose similar operations in 3 other states, leading to additional arrests and reforms. The support group that had inadvertently been infiltrated by David/Daniel became a model for how families can protect themselves from sophisticated fraud schemes. Margaret Williams and I started giving presentations to other support groups about red flags to watch for and verification steps to take when working with financial professionals. Looking back now, 18 months later, I realized that Evangeline's betrayal, as devastating as it was, taught our family something invaluable about the difference between blood relations and chosen family. The people who stood by us during the darkest moments, Rodriguez, Dr. Molina, Sarah, Kim, even Marcus in his own way, became more than allies. They became family. My parents, now in their 70s, have become advocates for other elderly people facing financial abuse. They speak at community centers and senior living facilities, sharing their story and helping others recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation. We survived because we had each other. Mom always tells her audiences, but we thrived because we learned that family is not just about who shares your blood. It is about who stands with you when everything falls apart. As for me, the experience changed my entire perspective on justice and responsibility. I returned to school to study elder law, determined to help other families avoid what we went through. The graphic design career that Evangeline had mocked as unstable became the foundation for a nonprofit organization that creates educational materials about financial elder abuse. The Victorian house on Maple Street is still in our family, and it always will be. But more importantly, our family itself survived intact, stronger and wiser than before. Sometimes the greatest gift wrapped in the worst betrayal is the revelation of who truly deserves your trust and love. Evangeline taught us that blood relationships mean nothing without integrity, loyalty, and genuine care. The family we chose after her betrayal proved to be more reliable and supportive than the family we were born into. Justice was not just served in that courtroom, it was served every day afterward as we rebuilt our lives around people who deserved our trust. What would you have done if you discovered a family member was systematically stealing from your parents? Have you ever had to choose between blood loyalty and doing what was right? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. I read every single one, and your experiences help other people going through similar situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories. Share this video with anyone who might be dealing with family financial issues, because sometimes people need to know they are not alone in these battles. Thank you so much for watching and for all the support you show this channel. I hope my experience helps you navigate whatever family challenges you might be facing, and remember, sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you are born into. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and keep fighting for what is right.